Is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America? That is not a hard question to answer when the stakes are this high.
That was Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, a Democrat. I don't think he likes NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. And we'll get to that. Tulsi Gabbard, who is the nominee to run the office of the Director of National Intelligence, to be the Director of National Intelligence, effectively a James Clapper for President Donald Trump, she went through her confirmation hearing, and then Kash Patel, the nominee for FBI Director, went through his confirmation hearing, and we'll get to both of their hearings because they have implications for what we cover on the show. Whistleblowers, attacks on journalism, press freedom, and secrecy as well, as any official will have an impact on government secrecy, depending on how they run their agency. But before we get to that, welcome to the show. This is the Dissenter Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Gosztola. This is the second edition of this newly formed show. It is part of the Dissenter newsletter. If you're receiving this on Friday, January 31st, thank you. You're a subscriber of the Dissenter. You support independent journalism at a time in which we need it more than ever, you could argue, and also independent journalism with a credibility, with the credibility to speak on these matters and point to a track record of being consistent during both political administrations, during Biden, during the first Trump administration, as well as Obama's 2 terms in office. I've been doing this work for that amount of time, and I've been consistent every single year that those presidents were in office in looking at cases against whistleblowers, examining attacks on reporters, media outlets, people who are unfairly, unjustly singled out. And we do that on this show. So go to thedissenter.org, thedissenter.org, and become a subscriber if you are not one already. And you can get this show early. Otherwise, we put it out for everyone on Monday, which means it'll be available for people to watch. This broadcast will stream February 3rd. That's how that works. When we begin the show, we normally will get into headlines. I have few headlines for this week because I want to spend time on clips from the confirmation hearings for Gabbard and Patel. That being said, there is a story from last week that I need to get to and very quickly note, because I said that independent journalist Alyssa Azar out in Portland, Oregon, was going to be on trial. And then a day after doing the recording for this show, the prosecutors decided to withdraw that political case, that attack on journalism. And so I have the statement that Alyssa Azar put out as a member of the National Writers Union. And so I want to read what she had to say. It gives some more background. I plan to actually talk about her case since I think it's something that people were largely unfamiliar with. I don't really need to anymore, and that's good. I'm glad that she is largely being spared, although already has gone through a lot when it comes to attacks on her work as a journalist. So here's Alyssa's story. This is their story. On May 2nd, 2024, I was arrested while reporting on the ground at Portland State University. I was documenting the police's actions as they cleared an encampment and library occupation in support of the liberation of Palestine, when later that evening I was arrested by the Portland Police Bureau while filming the violent arrests occurring in the park in front of the PSU library. Following my arrest, I faced consistent harassment from the police until I was finally let out of jail early the next morning. This harassment, including racist remarks, sexual harassment, misogyny, a cop taking a selfie with me as I was in handcuffs, and the persistent interruption of all my phone calls. This experience has highlighted the critical importance of press freedom and the rights of journalists to report on public events without fear of arrest or intimidation. The need for transparency and accountability in our institutions grows increasingly urgent. And under a Trump presidency, protecting our First Amendment rights is more important than ever. My trial was set to begin on January 27th. I was offered a plea deal multiple times, but I refused to plead guilty to a crime I did not commit. My commitment to uncovering the truth and informing the public remains steadfast, even in the face of these challenges. As of this morning, after seeing all of the support and the pressure campaign to drop the charges, the DA's office dismissed the case. The new DA is highly concerned with optics at the moment and worried about the increased attention. So I genuinely do not think this would have been possible without all of your support. I urge our community to continue advocating for our constitutional rights. I appreciate the union's support during this time, and I want to offer my deepest gratitude for standing by my side. So that is Alyssa Azar's statement, and congratulations to her for prevailing, and good work by everyone who showed support to Alyssa Azar and forced the prosecutors to back away from this political prosecution. I'll also add, before moving on to the two hearings, to Patel and also Gabbard, that we had an extreme example of an attack on a journalist happen when the police in Zurich, Switzerland, they abducted and then detained Electronic Intifada Executive Director Ali Abu Nima. And I wrote extensively about this, primarily by transcribing Abu Nima's firsthand account of his detention. He was actually processed into a Swiss prison before he was deported. An entry ban was taken out at the behest of a pro-Israel group that requested the police to basically retroactively ban him from Switzerland after he'd already entered Switzerland, had his passport marked, so he was approved by border control. And there's a lot that could be said about this, but I'll just encourage you to go read Abu Nima's words or find the Electronic Intifada's YouTube channel and pull up the video of Ali Abu Nima describing his imprisonment if you haven't already. It's over an hour, but every bit of it is important for us to consider, because this is where press freedom is headed in the Western world. We're not talking about the adversaries of the United States that the State Department always wants to hold up to show that the U.S. is better than them, or to make the case that the U.S. is better. It's usually a flawed case because they are covering up all the things that U.S. officials do to make the world more unsafe for journalists. But go watch that video, because it's moving and there's a lot in there that is also inspiring, because the solidarity in Alyssa Azar's case, there was similar solidarity for Ali Abu Nima that we can say probably prevented this from escalating further, because who knows? It's possible that without the support, without the public attention to Ali Abu Nima, there may have been a criminal charge brought against Ali Abu Nima, just the way that the police were being fed lies about him that related to anti-Semitism, how he fueled radicalization of people through his work as a journalist and activist. And so I have to leave it there and get to the clips, but it was important to not overlook what took place in the past week with Ali Abu Nima. Let's get to the first clip. The first clip that I have, we'll cover Tulsi Gabbard's hearing for the Director of National Intelligence, and she is up for this position. If confirmed, Tulsi Gabbard would control the vast majority of the intelligence industrial complex, or she would oversee it. This is Ron Wyden. Ron Wyden is a senator, a Democratic senator from Oregon.
Now to the matter of spying on journalists. You wrote in your response to the committee questions that you support the Biden administration Department of Justice's policy restricting the collection of reporters' records, and you called for the codification of those restrictions. Will you reconfirm that position this morning?
I believe strongly in the First Amendment, which protects a free press.
So you will, in effect, say that you will continue to support the Biden administration policy to protect journalists?
I'm not familiar with the specific Biden administration policy, but I believe strongly in the defense of the First Amendment.
It is a policy that restricts the collection of reporters' records, and you have called for the codification of those records. So I'm going to accept that you're not changing your position, and I appreciate it. I got time.
So Tulsi seemed to get a bit hung up there on it being called a Biden administration policy. She's obviously a Republican now and thinking of things in terms of what Trump will support or not support. So I don't know if she wanted to say she was in support of a Biden policy. That being said, as Wyden was confronting her with, these are her words, and just wanted to make sure she remained committed to it. I think generally speaking, when you strip away names, take away the politics, and just look at it on paper, it's a safe bet that Tulsi Gabbard believes that the journalists should not have their records secretly subpoenaed in service to unearthing their confidential sources so that the government can pursue leak prosecutions. Generally speaking, that's something that Tulsi Gabbard has opposed.
For a warrant. Section 702 also involves a huge loophole now that was included recently that could allow the government to force anyone with access to a Wi-Fi router or cable box to secretly participate in the warrantless surveillance program. Do you support, as I do, eliminating this language?
Senator, I would have to look more into that and assess, if confirmed, what the impacts of the implementation of the existing safeguards are and come back to you in Congress as you look at reauthorization.
It is a massive loophole, and I hope to hear after you've looked at it that you'll be supportive of my efforts.
It's a little bit baffling that Tulsi Gabbard didn't know what Ron Wyden was talking about, but here it is. The ACLU was one of several civil liberties organizations, and there's also press freedom groups as well as human rights organizations that I believe weighed in and were objecting to the fact that this law passed reauthorizing the warrantless searches of data collected from all of these different communications services for the purposes of so-called national security, and they're kept in the database. And the definition of electronic communication service providers was now expanded to force, according to the ACLU, U.S. businesses to give the NSA access to their Wi-Fi routers, phones, and other communications equipment. Effectively, they are deputized to work as spies for the NSA. And I feature Wyden here because he did not obsess over NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. He focused on policy questions related to Americans' privacy or the abuse of government surveillance, which I think was the absolute right thing to do. And I will now show you two examples of senators who were absolutely unhinged, in my opinion, each in their own manner, and how they went about questioning Tulsi. But let's start with Susan Collins, a Republican senator. I believe she's from Maine. And let's look at what she had to say when she questioned Tulsi. She continued the line of questioning that had been started by Senator Mark Warner, and he's a Democrat from Virginia. And then he's the vice chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that will or will not advance Tulsi Gabbard's nomination. Oh, but he started on Snowden, and then Collins picked up on it.
Edward Snowden does stand out as having done particularly grave harm to our national security by revealing top secret information, including sensitive sources and methods, thus jeopardizing agents in the field. So let me ask you a question. If confirmed, would you support or recommend a pardon or any kind of clemency for Edward Snowden?
Thank you for the question, Senator Collins. If confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, my responsibility would be to ensure the security of our nation's secrets and would not take actions to advocate for any actions related to Snowden.
So the answer is no. Is that
Correct.
correct? In 2020, you introduced the Protect Brave Whistleblowers Act, which would amend the Espionage Act to make it more difficult to prosecute individuals who reveal classified information. In particular, the bill would allow individuals to disclose even top secret information as long as it's not done with the specific intent to injure the United States or advantage any foreign nation. Your bill would also have created an affirmative defense if public disclosure of classified information were made for several reasons, one of which was to expose gross waste of funds. I strongly oppose this legislation, which would hamper our ability to prosecute people who give our adversaries classified information. So let me ask you this, Ms. Gabbard, do you still support providing individuals who have access to top secret information with the ability to make their own decisions regarding whether that information should be publicly disclosed, even though disclosure may cause tremendous harm to our country or our allies?
Senator, we cannot and should not have individual vigilantes within the intelligence community making their own decisions about how and where and when to expose our nation's secrets. The intent of the legislation that you have pointed out was pointed towards ensuring due process for those who are charged under the Espionage Act in a court of law. This is a law that has been abused in some cases and used for political purposes. President Obama charged more people under the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined.
Tulsi Gabbard is absolutely right, and we've discussed extensively through the Dissenter and documented the way in which the Espionage Act is routinely abused by the Justice Department to pursue mostly lower level government employees or contractors. By and large, those who are in high ranking positions who engage in unauthorized disclosures of information do not get punished for leaking to the press. There is a two-tiered justice system. And so the motivation behind the bill was from Defending Rights in Dissent, Policy Director Chip Gibbons, who will be on the show next week. He worked on this, and the bill was developed to modestly, or in some small way, reform a law that is used to repress dissent and has been for over a century in some way or another. Only in the last half century has it really accelerated in its application to going after media sources that the national security state opposes, wants to shut down. The problem for Susan Collins, however, in having this exchange with Tulsi Gabbard, is that she does not see any abuse in the way that the Espionage Act has been used by the Justice Department. Those individuals who have acted as whistleblowers but found themselves punished by being charged under the Espionage Act and then jailed and imprisoned, those are not people who she sees as honorable individuals. And so she asked this question that is riddled with errors and lies, like so much of what we heard from senators obsessed with Edward Snowden. Still, over 10 years after the leaks, you're still going on about this. Their obsession rivals their obsession with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Truly seems to occupy their minds so much, keeping him from having the support and credibility that he has obtained. And the fact that he is seen as this heroic figure by people around the world really gets under their skin, really just and truly needles at them, and they just can't handle it. But Collins was saying things that were wrong and also untruthful about the Espionage Act reform legislation. The bill summary attached to it actually came with a statement that everyone before the bill who was prosecuted would still have faced prosecution and likely would have been convicted, because it was their assumption, the senators or representatives that were involved in supporting this legislation, what they believed was that those people prosecuted were fairly prosecuted, or that they had not handled themselves in a manner in which the public interest defense would have been available. But the idea here is that if people who want to become whistleblowers, but who are afraid to go through proper channels because they think their superiors, whether they be superior military officers or supervisors or directors of their agencies, that they believe that they are going to face retaliation, that if they were to go to these other outlets that would be made available, that would be appropriate outside of their agency, and they still would probably be charged, but when they went on trial, they would have a public interest defense that they could bring forward in order to help win an acquittal. They could secure an acquittal. Susan Collins just reads this and sees that this reform legislation is going to help people take top secret information and give them to like the Chinese, Russians, or Iranians, or people in North Korea. All she can think of is in terms of espionage, because that is what is in the law. The law is Espionage Act. So you're thinking anybody prosecuted must be trying to do harm to the US, must be trying to advantage a foreign power. But what she doesn't seem to grasp is that it has gone far and away from that idea. The people who are being prosecuted, there is rarely evidence these days that they were trying to help a foreign power or do damage to the US. For the most part, a majority of the cases at this point come from people who have grievances against the US government and or think that there's something they've observed that the public should know. So that was Susan Collins. Here's Michael Bennett.
Was Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
Senator, I will also repeat my answer. He broke the law.
You said earlier that you were offended by a question that my colleague from Kansas asked, which I think was his duty as somebody on this committee to fulfill his responsibility to advise and consent. We are not here to be a rubber stamp for the President of the United States. So let me ask you again, do you believe, as the chairman of this committee believes, as the vast majority of members of our intelligence agencies believe, that Edward Snowden was a traitor to the United States of America.
Senator, if confirmed
This
as
is when the
Director of
rubber hits
National
the road.
Intelligence,
This is
I
when
will
this
work
is not
with you to make sure
this
that
is
there is
not
not
a
another
moment for
Snowden-like
social
leak.
media. It's not a moment to propagate theories, conspiracy theories, or attacks on journalism in the United States. This is when you need to answer the questions of the people whose votes you're asking for to be confirmed as the chief intelligence officer of this nation. As my colleague said, this is not about you. It's about the people that serve the intelligence agencies of the United States. Is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America? That is not a hard question to answer when the stakes are this high.
Senator, as someone who has
your
served
answer,
in
yes
uniform,
or no, is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
as someone who has
I'll go on
worn
to
our
my
uniform
questions.
in
This
combat, I understand how critical our national security
Apparently
is.
you don't.
Michael Bennet, senator from Colorado, doing what just about every senator on that committee seemed to believe it was their job to do, to get Tulsi Gabbard to back down from supporting Edward Snowden. And it was a national security sin she had to atone for in order to become the director for national intelligence. To be the next James Clapper, you have to say bad things, condemn, and you have to smear and lie about who he is. And you can't see him as a folk hero. Michael Bennet made that clear, that you saw him as a folk hero. He's not a folk hero. He's not a whistleblower. He's hiding behind the facade of a whistleblower, was what another senator said during that committee hearing. And it's not true. It's not true that this wasn't a moment for social media, because it was for Michael Bennet. His staff rushed to put this on their social media and share it. They cut together a bunch of clips and shared them for the public. So yeah, it was a performance by Michael Bennet, and it was a performance by other Democrats to attack Tulsi Gabbard and put on this show that they are loyal and devout to the national security state, and they will go after someone who has dissented from the national security state previously. And it is about attacks on journalism, too, because the journalists that worked on the Snowden files, Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, Ewan McCaskill, and others, were potentially at risk of being classified as information brokers, according to reporting from Yahoo News. And that was under Obama. And if that had taken place, it would have unleashed a whole range of potential attacks on them as individuals. And we do know that there were efforts to discredit them, and there was consideration within the Obama administration to target those journalists because of the effect that they were having in publicizing and sharing and reporting on NSA files exposed by Edward Snowden. The fact of the matter is, and this will be the last word on Edward Snowden in this broadcast today, is Edward Snowden, he revealed this information over 10 years ago. It has contributed to a number of court decisions in the United States in which judges ruled that certain programs involving mass surveillance were unconstitutional or violated Americans' privacy. And there was a reform bill that was passed, the USA Freedom Act under Obama, would not have happened if Snowden did not blow the whistle. There was an overhaul or a resurgence in the way that the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board occupies a function to provide oversight of the national security agencies, and that renewed importance can tell you would not have happened without Edward Snowden. The focus and interest in reining in surveillance, the fact that every time Section 702 or any other part of surveillance in the NSA that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court oversees, anytime that comes up for reauthorization, it is now an extremely contentious battle. Without Edward Snowden, this would not happen. So, and this applies to journalists and whistleblowers because these surveillance tools are used to silence them. So now quickly, as we wrap up, let's go to Kash Patel and his hearing. I just have a few short clips here of him being questioned about wanting to target journalists as the FBI director.
Have you referred to the media as the most powerful enemy of the United States that they have ever seen? Is that right?
Again, you're reading a quote. I take that
Speech
you're
to
reading it
CPAC
accurately.
22324. You said we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig the elections. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. Is that something you said?
That's a partial statement of what I said.
Steve Bannon's podcast. You also said you would put the entire fake news mafia press corps on your list. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
I don't have that in front of me.
Benny Johnson's podcast 82123.
And here's what this nominee himself has said about using his office to prosecute journalists. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're gonna come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. Is that a correct quotation, Mr. Patel?
Senator, that's a partial quotation,
But it's correct.
in part.
Every quote in a confirmation hearing is a partial quote. You cannot read an entire transcript of an interview. You only have 5 minutes as a senator to cross-examine somebody who is nominated for a position in the cabinet or in a leadership position like to run the FBI. I don't know how, though, adding more words would make that a defensible statement. It is wrong to commit yourself to prosecuting journalists. That is an attack on freedom of the press. So I'm aware that Kash Patel, who is a former official in Donald Trump's first administration, I'm aware that he said that he was a victim of government overreach. You know, he was targeted as part of the Russiagate investigation. He said that he's uniquely positioned to run the FBI because he knows how this system can be weaponized, how the system of justice and law enforcement can be weaponized to go after a person. Because he himself believes he was subjected to a kind of torment, to a kind of cost financially and personally, and that he was the target of government overreach, that there were leaks of information that were put out there by government officials to destroy him personally. But I'll just say right here that I hesitate to believe that this translates into I'm going to show restraint and not use this power. He seems very much intent to use this power to go after people in the press, and I don't think he would hesitate to use the powers at the FBI to go after those who speak out against Donald Trump politically, to expose policies, to expose programs and operations that people believe are wasteful, fraudulent, abusive, or violations of the law. That if it's just straight up sensitive information or classified information and they're exposing something that people should know about, that he as an FBI director will go after and punish those people as harshly as possible for Donald Trump, for his leader, for Donald Trump. Let's quickly recall as we end the show, there's Project 2025. It's not conspiratorial to come at Trump nominees and ask them, do you plan to put journalists on enemies lists? The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, embraced by a number of people, written and worked on by people who have positions in Donald Trump's administration, advocated for the Justice Department, rolling back a policy at the Justice Department that discourages secret subpoenas of journalists' records. And they don't want that anymore because they would like to be able to investigate media organizations that publish stories about Donald Trump and find out who are the media sources. So with that said, thank you for watching the Dissenter Weekly. I thank you for tuning in to this broadcast, and we'll be back next week with another show. I expect to have Chip Gibbons on as a guest to discuss a case involving a former CIA analyst named Asif Rahman, who was recently convicted of violating the Espionage Act. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.